James had moved into Willow Creek 2 years ago after transferring from Washington, D.C. As a federal intelligence analyst, he chose the sleepy suburban community precisely because of its anonymity. But anonymity doesn't last when Karen lives across the street. She had binoculars, a clipboard, and apparently no day job. Her HOA obsessions were legendary, whispered about at neighborhood potlucks and barbecues. At first, James humored it. He'd seen worse forms of control in his line of work. But when a second violation arrived the next week for improper mulch color accompanied by a photograph taken from behind his hedge, James knew this wasn't just micromanagement. Karen didn't know he was federal. She assumed he was another contractor or retired military man based on his immaculate lawn and early morning routine. Her assumptions, however, were dangerous, especially when made by someone wearing a knockoff police vest labeled Neighborhood Patrol. By the third violation, a citation for an overly reflective mailbox that met all USPS guidelines, James had had enough. He replied with a calm email to the HOA board, citing relevant county ordinances. The response came from Karen herself, dripping with bureaucratic threat. If residents can't meet our high standards, they may not be suited for Willow Creek. That was when James began documenting everything. Every note, every citation, every passive-aggressive flyer left on his doorstep. He noticed Karen pacing near his property with a notepad. Strange cars began parking across the street for hours at a time. One evening, James approached a man sitting in a beat-up sedan who claimed he was with HOA security. James recognized the badge stitched into the man's polo shirt immediately as a fake. The next morning, that same sedan blocked James' driveway. Karen stood on her porch, arms folded, watching like a hawk. James walked over and knocked. She opened the door with faux authority. "You're not authorized to confront HOA security," she said. "We've had complaints about your vehicle. It violates peace hour." James raised an eyebrow. "My car is electric. It's silent. I don't need a decibel meter to know when the peace is disturbed," she snapped. Karen claimed James had been red flagged by the HOA Special Compliance Committee, a group that didn't exist in the bylaws. That's when James realized Karen had built a parallel enforcement structure with no legal standing. He asked her directly, "Are you refusing to move that vehicle?" Her answer, "You're welcome to escalate it. But I don't think you'll like the attention." She didn't know who she was dealing with. That evening, James filed a report with the county clerk. It wouldn't be his last. Karen had built a faux system with uniforms, radios, cones, and staged violations. Her team consisted of random recruits, one with an outstanding warrant for petty theft. James installed surveillance equipment disguised as lawn decor. He captured everything: fake officers trespassing, urinating on his rose bushes, attempting to tamper with his AC unit. The breaking point came when a man in a faux security shirt entered James' property without permission, poked around with a flashlight, and began photographing the HVAC system. James confronted him silently from behind. "You're on private property," James said. "Federal agent, step back." The man fled. James filed a sheriff's report and sent Karen an email. If unauthorized personnel entered again, she would be held liable under federal law. Her reply, "Prove it." 3 days later, Karen assembled a faux emergency audit team that cordoned off James' driveway with cones. They waved a laminated document citing Section 14 of the HOA chart era section that didn't exist. James activated his GoPro and said, "You have 30 seconds to leave before I call county enforcement." Karen arrived mid-standoff. "You really don't understand how this works, do you?" she sneered. "Let me be clear," James replied. "You've created a false security apparatus staffed by unlicensed civilians. That's conspiracy to harass." The HOA patrol began to back away. Karen tried to assert control. "He's stalking me with cameras. He's threatening my personnel," she told the arriving deputy. "You got documentation?" the deputy asked. James handed over a flash drive. The deputy took one look and said, "Looks like someone's in deep mulch." Karen's illusion of control cracked. Her fake HOA police had been exposed. But James wasn't done. He requested HOA financial records, as permitted by law. When the records arrived, they were redacted with a Sharpie. James used OCR software to reconstruct them. One line item stood out: $18,300 labeled Community Security Enhancements. Willow Creek had no gates, guards, or cameras. The funds had gone to a shell LLC, KLS Neighborhood Support Services LLC. Karen Lockwood Summers. James cross-referenced payments, confirmed no licenses, no staff, and traced addresses to P.O. boxes. He submitted everything to the county auditor's fraud division. Within 48 hours, they opened a formal investigation. At the next board meeting, James stood up. "Can the board clarify the $18,300 for security enhancements?" he asked. Karen tried to bluff. "Approved by whom?" James pressed. The room turned cold. One board member stammered, "I wasn't aware that line item existed." Karen exploded. "This man is stalking me. And you've weaponized your role for personal gain," James replied. The meeting ended with 2 board resignations. A letter went out from the auditor. All HOA funds were frozen. Karen panicked. She showed up on porches begging for support. She called an emergency meeting wearing a power suit and presented a binder claiming emergency governance rights. She declared herself acting director and proposed a $120 compliance fee. Residents revolted. Karen was reported to the state attorney general. A week later, investigators arrived at her integrity forum. "Miss Lockwood," they said, flashing badges, "you are being detained for suspicion of fraud, falsification, and obstruction." The room fell silent. As she was escorted out, she shouted, "You're all complicit." A neighbor whispered, "Promise?" James stood silently in the back. He didn't need to gloat. The law spoke louder. But it wasn't over. An anonymous flash drive arrived on James' porch, surveillance footage, secretly recorded by an insider, Barry, the HOA electrician. The videos proved premeditated targeting. Karen called James a military intel type and said, "We can go further." Barry testified, admitting Karen had asked him to install covert cameras. James forwarded the evidence to the Federal Crimes Unit. More charges followed. Karen had sold compliance packages to HOAs across multiple states. She built profiles on residents and rated them by compliance behavior. Karen was indicted federally. Her mugshot went viral. Her trial became suburban legend. She was barred from all future HOA leadership, publicly disgraced, and sentenced to restitution. The community reformed. Karen's kingdom collapsed in full view of those she tried to control. Willow Creek, once ruled by fear, now thrived under transparency. James never sought praise, but neighbors renamed the ethics clause after him, the Carter provision. The HOA newsletter now featured birthdays and pet of the month. The community installed a plaque that read, "In honor of vigilance over vanity, in defense of dignity over decorum." Beneath it, etched in tiny print, "P.S. Do not find this rock." James smiled as he walked by. For once, the only thing under surveillance was the neighborhood cat chasing squirrels.